Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my February wrap-up, which is coming a little bit late, but you know, let's just get into it. February was, I feel like, kind of an unusual reading month for me for a lot of reasons. One, I read 15 books. Which is a lot for me. I am usually more in the like 6 to 8 books a month range, maybe 10 max, but I read 15 books. The majority of those were audiobooks. I think only 2 of the books that I finished were physical reads, which is also unusual for me. And most of those audiobooks were contemporary romance. I've been on a real contemporary romance jag this year. And that is also unusual for me. Like, I always read a little bit of contemporary romance every year, although apparently not last year. But usually I'll, like, once a year, I get in the mood for contemporary romance. I binge read like 3 or 4, and then I'm like, that's good. That's it for the year. But I've already read 3 contemporary romances in January, and yet I continued on to read like 12 in February. So like, I don't know what's going on with me. But let's just get into it. First, I have 2 soft DNFs. I was kind of debating, I'm like, at this point, I don't know if I like include my DNFs in my wrap-ups or not, but I have 2 soft DNFs. So meaning that these are ones I might come back to. They're not hard DNFs. And also because of that, I don't have like a lot to say about them, because it's not like, oh, this was wrong and this was wrong. It's just sort of like, I was just sort of bored and not invested, but not so bored and uninvested that I'm like hard DNF. I'm like, maybe I just wasn't in the mood for this. Maybe I'll give it another shot. I don't know. So the ones that I have were Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I got a decent amount. I got almost halfway into the book. I got like, what page is this? 208. I don't know why I'm holding the book this way. That was a very strange way to open it. And then the other one that I have is Inanna by Emily H. Wilson. And this one, I didn't get as far into it. I was actually listening to it as an audiobook, but I got 6 chapters in, which is about 60 pages into the physical book. And this is one that was on my TBR clear out project for the year. So this isn't, so neither of these are really definitive. These are both ones that I just kind of went about, and then I was like, maybe I'll give them another shot at some point. So it's not a hard DNF. So I'm not counting this as like having been cleared off my you know, clear out TBR yet, which I don't love having like a book in limbo when I have like a project like that. All right, so let's get into the books that I actually finished. I have, if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my reading journal. This year I went very simple. The outside is fancy. This is my reading journal this year, and I love it. I love just like the color palette of this, feels very me. But I'm going very simple in the like internal structure and design, very minimalist. I'm not doing doodles and just like listing things. But what did I read? I'm gonna start with fantasy or historical fiction that I read this month, which is only 3 books, and then we'll get into all the rest of the contemporary romance that I read in February. So first up, gonna talk about Princess Floralinda and the 40 Flight Tower by Tamsin Muir. This is a fantasy novella about a princess that gets put in a tower by a witch, and then she doesn't get saved, and so she has to kind of figure out how to get herself out. And she has to go through every floor of this 40 flight tower has a different challenge on it that the knights or the princes were supposed to go through, but she's going through them in reverse order, going down, 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 down. With varying degrees of success and intentionality. This one I listened to as an audiobook, and I thought it was fine. It was cute. The type of humor that it has felt very young to me. There was something about it that, like, I would not say that this is appropriate for children, but the style of humor felt like the kind of humor that I have read in like children's fantasy books. And that was fine. Like this one, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I think I gave it like 3 to 3.5 stars. I wasn't really sure like exactly where I was landing on it, but I thought it was fine. Next, I have Queen Hereafter by Isabel Schuler. This is a historical fiction about Gruach, who is becomes Lady Macbeth, but this is more so her backstory and her like growing up, which is part of it that I guess I kind of thought that it would also include her, like the story of Macbeth, like her side of the story, but it ends before that. It is really like her childhood and young adulthood and kind of how she gets to the point where she is married to Macbeth. I didn't love this as much as I wanted to. I was so excited for this. I don't know, I had a really good feeling that I was going to love it, and it just didn't land for me. I didn't find the main character in this to be particularly like compelling, and I didn't feel like she had a really distinct personality. It felt like her greatest personality trait, especially in the first half, but honestly for most of the book, was just that as a child, her grandmother gave her like this prophecy that she will be queen, like one day you will be queen. And that's her one thing. She doesn't really develop much personality other than this like certainty and this like holding on to that certainty of like, my grandmother said one day I will be queen. And then she just sort of expects it to happen. But I also felt like I felt like she needed to kind of go one way or the other. I wanted her to either be more vulnerable and naive and struggle more to become this more like cutthroat, devious queen, or I wanted her to go more in the other direction and like be really like cutthroat and devious from the beginning, and like, you know, not that she has to be like murdering people as a child, but like, you know, you can kind of see the inkling from her as a child that she's going to become this queen, you know, and like I wanted her to have a more like strong, distinct personality in one way or the other, you know, like either she is struggling more to take control of her life, or she's like really actively taking control of her life. And I just felt like she kind of landed in this bland middle that she didn't really do either for a lot of the book. I think that the second half she did more, and also was able to, because she was older and she was kind of placed in scenarios where she had to make more like choices. But even so, I just felt like I needed something more from her as a character. And I think I gave this like another like 3 to 3.5 stars. It was okay. And then the last book that I have in this category is Child of the Prophecy by Juliet Marillier. This is my, you know, millionth reread of this book. This is the third book in the Seven Waters series. In this one, we are following Fanya, who I guess I can't really tell you who Fanya is, because it might spoil things for the first 2 books, but I do have a full spoilers vlog and a non-spoiler review, which I'm hoping to put out before this video, but if it's not out already, it will be like the next video that I post. And if it's already out, I will link it in the description. So if you want more details about this, either full spoilers or non-spoiler, that will be linked in the description. But, you know, once again, I loved this reread. It is Celtic historical fantasy that is set in medieval Ireland, following the family of Seven Waters, who have this deep, like, spiritual connection to the land of Seven Waters and the forest. There are fair folk and the old ones, and each book is kind of following the next generation of women in this family. And I love this series. It's one of my favorite series of all time, by one of my favorite authors, and I had a great time reading this. Once again, this is a 5-star read for me. that, as I always say that, like, that's, you know, a very biased rating, as this is a series that I have read and reread many times over the years. All right, so now we can get into all of the contemporary romance that I read. A lot of these are in series. I'm gonna get one of the standalones out of the way, which is The Fake Boyfriend Fiasco by Talia Hibbert. This is following our main character is at this point in her life where she's very distrustful and is kind of like, I'm not really gonna be dating, because that didn't go well. When she meets a soon-to-be retired, like, professional soccer player who decides that he needs her help to help him, like, pretend to be his girlfriend to, like, fend off other women in his life. And so it's fake dating, and then of course they end up falling for each other. And this one, I thought it was fun, but not my favorite from Talia Hibbert. Like, Talia Hibbert has some contemporary romance that I absolutely love. I love her Brown Sisters trilogy. I love the Ravenswood series. I think that's what it's called. I've read some of her other standalones. Like, in general, I love Talia Hibbert. This one just, like, didn't land for me as well. I think part of it is that the tone of it felt maybe a little bit goofier than some of her others, which, like, she always has humor in her books, but there was something about the premise that felt a little more goofy than some of her other books. And also it takes place over such a short period of time that it just felt a little unbelievable. So this one I gave, like, again, 3 to 3.5 stars. Not my favorite from this author, but a big chunk of my contemporary romance reading for February was reading the rest of the Game Changers series by Rachel Reed. So in January, I read Heated Rivalry and The Long Game, which are the two Shane and Ilya books. And then in February, I read the rest of the Game Changer series. I also reread Heated Rivalry because I wanted to reread it after having kind of, like, read the rest of the series and have that kind of context for it, even though it's book 2 in the series, but I just wanted the context. Then I also read like 5 or 6 short stories that are on her blog, and then I also read 2 standalones by Rachel Reed that are also hockey romance but are not connected to the Game Changer world. So at this point, I think I have pretty much read everything that Rachel Reed has written. So it was a real deep dive. For this, I don't know if I'm gonna go in depth on every single book because that would just take so long. I'm gonna talk about them a little more broadly and then maybe go into details on just a couple of them. For the Game Changer series, I kind of tier rank them as like my 2 least favorite, my kind of middle range, and then my 2 most favorite in this series. So we'll start at the bottom with my 2 least favorite, and I'll say, like, when I say least favorite, I mean that these are still 3.5 stars. Like, they're still good, they're still solid, and I enjoyed my time with them, but comparatively not as good as the other books in the series, and a lot of that is because of just some like tropes that they use that are just not personal favorites. So my 2 least favorite in the series were Common Goal and Game Changer. For Game Changer, this one is kind of at the bottom, I think, because especially in the first half, it is very, it's just like more like spicy scenes than I really care about. Because even like when I'm reading romance, I'm not really in it for like the spicy scenes. Like, I have no problem with them, but that's not like why I'm there. I'm there for like the emotional payoff of the books. And in a lot of this series, I think one of the things that Rachel Reed does very well is really integrating like plot, character, relationship elements into the spicy scenes, so they are really relevant. But I just didn't feel like that was as present, especially in the first half of Game Changer, because it's a lot of them just like hooking up at the beginning and then they develop feelings. Like, they kind of like each other from the beginning, but they really like develop feelings after they've kind of been hooking up for a while. And I just am like, I don't really care about this until they have feelings. Until they start having feelings, I don't really care about the spicy scenes that they're having, because that's not what I'm here for, you know? So I think that just kind of dragged down some of my enjoyment. I also will say, I did these on audiobooks. The narrator for Game Changer. So in this series, the first 3 books are done by one narrator. The second half of the series is done by a different narrator. But I liked the narrator for the second half of the series much better than the narrator that was for the first half of the series. So I do feel like to some extent the voice that he did for Kip really influenced my enjoyment of this, because I just was like, what is going on here? Anyways, so I said I was not gonna get into too many details, but I can't help myself. So the other one in this like bottom tier is Common Goal. This is another one that kind of starts out as like them like hooking up and then developing feelings. They kind of like each other from the beginning, but that's just not an emotional arc that I really care about as much. I like more of like they develop feelings and then they get together. It also has some tropes that I don't love personally. It is an age gap romance. Now, granted, in this one, both of the people in the romance are adults. I think they're like 40 and like 25. So at least they're both adults, and the younger one, like, his brain is fully developed. So I'm like, at least there's that. So even though I don't personally love an age gap romance, I'm not mad about this one because at least they're adults. And so again, it's like a trope that's not my favorite. Oh, also it's kind of this sort of like teaching the other one, which I don't love it when like relationships and stuff are framed as like teaching. It just there's something about it that always feels a little icky to me for some reason, and I don't know, it just never lands right for me. However, I will say that the older character in this, in a lot of ways, it feels very reminiscent to me of Shane, and I feel like this is what Shane would be like when he gets older and maybe chills out a little bit. Middle tier for me is Heated Rivalry and The Long Game, which I read last month, and those are similarly like, you know, the arc of the relationship just isn't my favorite trope of like starting with hooking up and then catching feelings, and also I'm not big on like enemies to lovers kind of trope. And then my top 2 are Tough Guy and Role Model, and the reasons that these ones are at the top is, for one thing, again, the emotional arc of the characters is more like they develop feelings and then they get together, and that is much more of a arc that I am interested in. And I think a lot of that is because, as I said, I really am not interested in the spicy scenes until there are feelings involved. And usually what makes that like an interesting part of the story is especially like when they first get together, when it's like there's so much riding on this because they have already developed feelings, and so it just feels like the stakes are so high, and it's just like so exciting when they finally like kiss for the first time, they finally get together for the first time. It's just like you know how much it means to them because there has been this emotional build, and so that is more of an emotional arc that I enjoy reading, and these two are more like that. They also have other tropes that I like Tough Guy. The main character is kind of a misunderstood cinnamon roll. Like, he's so sweet, but he is this really like big guy, and he knows how to fight, and so he is essentially on his team. Like, if a fight starts, he's supposed to be the one who fights because he's like a big guy who can fight. But he's just like, I don't want to fight. I just want to like go live a happy little life. So, and I love a little like misunderstood cinnamon roll, or not little, he's a big guy, but whatever. I love him. I love his love interest. And I love that they actually knew each other when they were younger. I also really liked that in Tough Guy, they talked more about like mental health. The main character has anxiety and takes medication for it, and also that the medication affects his sex drive. And so I also really appreciated that they talked about like couples that have different levels of like sex drive and like how that affects their relationship and them, like, you know, how they deal with that. And then in Role Model, that is more of like a grumpy sunshine. They become friends and then fall for each other. But also, I think one of the things that I really loved about this one is that the main character that we're following, I don't want to spoil anything, but he has this sort of like negative reputation, and there was this one like other player that he was friends with, but then something happens where he ends up like calling out his friend, and it turns into a whole thing, and he kind of gets like traded to a different team, and he is really at a point of like a lot of upheaval because he lost that friendship. He has lost this kind of image that he has created for himself in the public eye. He has lost the team that he was on. He's on a new team now, and he has to kind of reconstruct who he is, and he has to decide like, who am I going to be? What do I stand for? Like, I called out this friend of mine for what he has done, and am I gonna stand by that? And am I going to like change who I am, or at least how I'm perceived by others? Am I going to publicly like reshape my identity? And that is something that I find really interesting. Not only that like is his character, it's like admirable that he would you know, publicly take a stand on something, but I always find it so interesting when a character is having this like self-reflective point in their life where they are having to make really active choices about their identity. Who are they going to be? Reshaping themselves, and deciding like, what do I stand for, and am I going to live by the things that I have said? That is so interesting to me, and I love that. So that is why that's my top tier. So Tough Guy and Role Model, my two favorites. And those I think were both 4.5 stars. And then I also read the standalones. So one is The Shots You Take, I think, which is another like unrelated hockey romance that is a second chance romance. It is about these two men who used to play hockey together. They were best friends kind of with benefits, and then they sort of not exactly had a falling out, but one of them had some struggles with mental health and left the NHL, and they kind of lost contact. The book starts at his father's funeral, and his old friend comes back to reconnect. And we follow as they kind of get to know each other again. And I definitely enjoyed this one. Second chance romance is not always a trope that works for me, but I think that this was one that did work because second chance romance, I think it's really hit or miss depending on exactly why and how did they like break up or have a falling out the first time, and then why and how they reconnect the second time. And I feel like this one did it pretty successfully, and I definitely enjoyed it, and I think I gave this one 4 stars. And then the other standalone that I read was Time to Shine, which is following Landon, who is a goalie who is called up as a replacement goalie to an NHL team because one of their goalies got injured, and so he's going to be a backup goalie, but it's like this is his dream to be called up to the NHL. This could be like his shot, but he's dealing with a lot. He is dealing with grief over losing his sister years ago. He holds a lot of grief and guilt over that. And he also is somebody who feels like he feels like he's just kind of odd. He doesn't really fit in with people. He has a lot of like very specific like rituals and routines for himself. He doesn't really like to, like, he's very quiet and reserved. He's not particularly social. He doesn't like to be touched. He kind of holds himself apart. But this is another kind of grumpy sunshine sort of dynamic, because when he gets there, he meets another hockey player who is kind of like a legacy player. His father was like a big NHL player. And this is, I think his name is Casey, is the guy. And so Casey is this like ray of sunshine, loves people, very chatty, and hates being alone. And so he invites Landon to come live at his house since he's gonna be here temporarily, like instead of finding some random place to rent, just come live at my house. So we have a little bit of like, it's a big house, but it's kind of forced proximity. And like, as I said, grumpy sunshine. And it just was, I loved this one so much, mostly because I love Landon so much. I just love his character. And yeah, I just loved them together. I think this is my favorite Rachel read. I don't know if it would like hit the same for everybody, but for me specifically, there are just things about this character and their dynamic that I just loved. Now, Casey as a character, who's the kind of sunshine character, his personality, as I was reading this, it was like something about him reminds me so much of like, if you've ever watched Dan and Phil. I used to watch them when I was like in college, and then they kind of like, I stopped watching them for a while, and then they recently have come back and have like a new podcast, and I've like seen a couple episodes, so they're sort of like on my mind because I recently saw a few of their episodes. But Casey's personality reminds me so much of Phil's personality, of just like the wacky stuff he says, and the like, he says like wacky things and then people kind of make fun of him, and then he's kind of like, no, don't make fun of me. But it's like Phil's personality, but much more extroverted and like in a hockey player body. But that's sort of his vibe, is this sort of like goofy, like sunshine kind of character who doesn't always think before he speaks, but he's just like such a sweet person. There were some things about Casey's character that I did feel like maybe his character could have had more of an arc. I didn't think that his character like grew or changed that much. His character arc was more about like kind of accepting himself. But I still feel like maybe, I don't know, I just feel like he could have had a little bit more of an arc. There were a couple points where like, as much as I do enjoy his character and how he's like, he's so talkative and he like doesn't always think before he speaks, and he's kind of awkward and goofy and just, he's very fun. There are a few moments where I just was like, this kind of crossed a line to me of like, this is too much. You need to get it together. Like, loving people and having emotional intelligence are not necessarily the exact same thing, because there are situations where it's like, well, if he had emotional intelligence, maybe he wouldn't have done or said this thing, which has now like embarrassed this person or put this other person in kind of an awkward situation. So there were a couple times where it kind of was like, maybe that was like a little too far. But overall, I mean, he's a very endearing character. And as I said, this was a 5-star for me. This was my favorite of like Rachel Reed's books. And actually in March, I have already reread it. So I don't know what that tells you, I guess, how much I loved it. Okay, I need to move on because I am talking too much. The other contemporary romance series that I read was, I think it's called the Well Met series by Jen DeLuca. So the first book is Well Met, and then it's Well Played, Well Matched, and Well Traveled. So the first 3 were actually rereads because I have read those before, and then the 4th one was a first time read for me. And this series, I decided to reread it because in January I was talking about contemporary romance with starchy heroes, and I remember the first book in the series having a starchy hero, so I wanted to reread it. And that one, I had a really good time. I don't know if I explained what the series is about, but essentially it's contemporary romance that revolves around a Renaissance fair. So in the first one, we are following our main character has moved to this small town to help her sister who was in a car accident and was hurt, and so she's helping her sister and her sister's daughter, and the daughter wants to participate in this like local Renaissance fair that they put on every year, and so our main character gets involved in that as well, and then she gets romantically involved with the guy who is kind of the like the person who runs the Renaissance fair every year, and also participates in it as a pirate. And so that's the first book, and then each book it's like we follow the romance of one of the other characters that we have met through this Renaissance fair. And so it's just like a very cute concept. As somebody who loves a Renaissance fair, like it just was very fun to read. The first one I think is probably the only one really worth reading in the series, in my opinion. That one is certainly very fun. It does have a starchy hero, and I also think that that one just does the best job with like the romance and the emotional component, and again answering that question of like, why are these two people together? Why do these two people matter, that it's the two of them and not anybody else? I didn't feel like the other ones in the series did as like good a job of answering that question, and also involved some tropes that I didn't love. Like the second one had too much miscommunication and like lying and like fake identities. I just feel like the first one is kind of the best. I think there is a fifth one coming out maybe this year, and I'm not sure if I'm going to read it because I don't know if I feel like after that first one if the series has been worth it. So the rest of the books in the series I think I gave either like a 3 or maybe 3.5 stars at best, but the first one I think got like either a 4 or 4.5 star, because it was certainly very fun. But those are all of the books that I read in February. I know we're halfway into March, but how was your February reading? Have you read any of these? If you've read the Game Changer series, what is your tier ranking of the books, or which is your favorite? However you want to answer it, but let me know. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.